So today we pulled the studs out of the other cylinder head and took you to school a little bit on what we're doing and why we're pulling those studs out. So here's some time lapse. All right, here we are. I realized yesterday I never showed you guys what I was doing. This here is a rocker stud. It is press fit into this hole here. The push rod, which rides on the lifter, which rides on the camshaft, comes here, and the valve goes right here. There's a rocker arm that sits right here. As the push rod comes up, as the cam lobe rises on the lifter and pushes the lifter up, pushes the push rod up, it pushes the rocker arm like this, pushes the rocker arm down, opens the valve, and that's what lets air in, and then combustion, and then lets air out. Or lets air in, it seals it, then combustion, then it lets all the air out. So, the problem that these have, it's kind of a lot to explain, but the faster you want to rev your engine, the faster that the rocker arm has to push this valve open and then close. And the thing that closes the valve is actually the limiting factor. It's the valve spring. So you can have a soft valve spring that will work just fine at lower RPM. But then once you get up to a certain RPM, and you exceed the closing potential of the valve spring, you get something called valve float, where these valves don't actually seal all the way. They don't come all the way back up in their bore. They float open because it's getting open and closed so quickly, so many times, that then you have both valves stuck open. You've got intake air going out the exhaust and exhaust air going in the intake. It's just a mess, and your engine won't actually run past that. It's pretty bad for stuff. You can bend push rods. You can flatten lifters, you can wipe cams, you can break shit. So what you want to do if you want to have a lot of RPM is you put a really, really heavy spring here, so that the camshaft actually has to work really hard to open the spring, which is not a huge deal. As long as you have a properly oiled engine, you're not going to hurt anything there. But then the problem becomes these are only pressed in. There is nothing but friction between this outer layer here and this inner layer here holding this in. And if this comes out, then your rocker arm falls off and then your valves stay stuck closed. So if you're doing crazy RPM, you need to upgrade from these to something that's threaded. It's a lot more clamping force, it holds on a lot tighter. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. Now the mechanics of how we're actually pressing this out are actually pretty cool. I don't know if exciting is the right word. These are threaded, obviously, because you have to thread the rocker stud on there. So what you do is you take a bolt that has the same thread pitch and something for the bolt head to press on, which I've pretty much destroyed the socket now, but whatever, it's fine. You stick whatever it is over here. You can use a steel sleeve. It's got to be pretty strong. And then basically you're using the threads as a mechanical advantage to press this out. Because as you're pressing this thread down, the bottom of the bolt is actually pushing against the top of the socket, and the socket can't go anywhere. It's hitting the head. So the only option is to pull the stud upwards. So that's basically what I was doing. I just ran it down. I had this washer here, and this was the right amount of space here to get me started. Couldn't run all the way down because then the threads would start cutting into the bottom of the stud where there's no threads, and that's going to mess stuff up. So I'd have to pull the nut off, pull these off, and then I put another bigger nut on here just as another spacer. And you could just stack these if you don't want to use your socket. You can just stack those and use those. I've done that before. So then you see there's even actually threads buried further in there, which doesn't matter because this is pressed all the way out. But that means we have enough height now. And then you just start over again. Now if you're going to do this yourself, you need to be very careful. I actually messed up a couple of these just because I was trying to be a little greedy. You need to make sure you have enough of the stud sticking out that you can actually get all of the threads from the bolt, or the nut rather, onto the stud. Otherwise you'll pull the threads either off the stud, which happened yesterday, or out of the nut, which happened today a couple times. But luckily I had more nuts, and it's actually better to mess up the nut than to mess up the stud. You mess up the stud, you gotta do what I did yesterday. You gotta weld a bunch of stuff on and use something else to press it out. So they make fancy tools that hold on to these and pull them out, but we're not a machine shop. We're just some, hillbilly in a garage. So we don't have fancy tools like that. We have some fancy tools, but we don't have those fancy tools because we don't need them. So what we're going to do next for the heads, which we may not do tomorrow because I probably don't have the right size tap, I'm going to do some research and figure out what size drill bit I need and what size tap I need. And then we're going to tap these threads for the threaded portion of the thread-on rocker stud. And then we're going to be able to, the studs at least will be able to handle probably 10,000, 11,000 RPM. Now we're not going to build, we don't have the bottom end to support that. We only have a 2-bolt main block, so that won't help. Well, that won't suffice. It'll rattle itself apart basically. But we want to go at least 6,500 because RPM is fun and RPM makes power. So both of those reasons are why we want RPM. So that's the next thing we're going to do, is we're going to tap these and get them set up for the threaded in studs. And after that, we do have some port matching to do. I don't believe, I might actually have a set of exhaust manifold gaskets, but I don't think I have intakes. Got to get some big intake manifold gaskets, and then we're just going to do a port match. We might do a little smoothing. These heads are actually pretty good. You can't really see that well in the exhaust side there. The exhaust side is not as important as the intake side. People will argue with me about that, but whatever. They're actually pretty decent. They're pretty open. So these are pretty good heads. But we may still open up a little bit more, just do a little bit more. Definitely going to port match more, but maybe do some smoothing and a little bit. I don't know the exact magical science of head porting. There's some really weird stuff with wave frequencies and resonance and port tuning, and there's just a lot of weird things that I don't know. So I'm not going to really full on go crazy and try to pretend like I know what I'm doing. But at least just a port match on the intake and the exhaust, and some smoothing and a little bit of enlarging in some places won't hurt anything. And if anything, it'll help. It'll make a little more power. But when you're trying to turn all these RPM, you want to have the highest flowing head you possibly can. So we're going to do that. But we're probably not going to do that tomorrow because I don't think I have intake gaskets. Yeah, so there you go. That's the beginnings of instructions on how to machine your heads. So you saw the other day I pulled the valve springs off. That's pretty self-explanatory. If you have a question about pulling valve springs off, you post a comment and I'll explain it. We'll either reply in a comment or maybe I'll make a video about it, specifically showing you exactly how to do it. It's not really that hard. Once you do it once, you're like, oh, okay, this is easy. So, but that's all for now. So, see you tomorrow.